What's up, guys? Today we're going to be working on the E30 subframe adapted for the N54 engine. Right behind me, we have some 3/16 by 3-inch carbon steel. We're going to be adapting the existing E30 subframe with a crossbar across the middle, and we're going to be installing the power steering rack as well. This is going to be a 1995 M3 rack, which is 3.2 turns lock to lock, which is a unique ratio for the M3. It is more or less a drop-in replacement for the E30, generally speaking. All you need are spacers, and you have to update the steering column by shortening it just a tad. But for our application, we're going to be installing it completely custom with this extra metal that we have, and we're going to be putting it right underneath the N54 oil pan. Let's do that today. You can see that we've got our faces here on that side of the subframe and another one right there on the subframe. What we're going to do is we're going to be taking that 3/16 steel. We're going to be welding right to the edges of each of those, and we're going to be putting a cross member across right here, right in front of the notch in the oil pan. It's going to clear the exhaust header, and it's going to mount to the other side. And then we're going to take our steering rack and we're going to put the steering rack right in front as well. It's going to be a custom mount steering rack. That'll go right to the tie rods as shown. So we're going to be doing a lot of that today. And that's going to be the next stage in getting this N54 completely integrated into this car. The subframe is one of the major welding components left on this swap. As you can tell, we've done a lot of welding here. We've done our engine brackets. We've done our core support being removable, so we can remove and install this engine quite easily. And there's just so much more to do here, and I'm excited to share that all with you guys. So let's go forward and do the subframe. All right, so I'm keeping it simple. Keeping this simple. I don't want to make the shapes too complicated. 2 pieces of 3/16 steel. We're going to weld it right to the top, right to the edges of the subframe, and we're going to put a bar across it, and we're going to gusset it later as we feel necessary. After we install that, then when the E36 steering rack comes in, we'll install the steering rack and make the mounts for it, and make sure that the steering column mounts to it really well. We can take the engine out for that because it's going to be super easy to do the steering column modifications, and I got to figure out how to do that. So let's just install these guys. Let's just weld them up, or at least tack them in, and then go from there. That's how we do it. We do it, go from there. If it doesn't work, remove the tacks. Now that the side rails are in, gotta test fit the steering rack and do some thinking. All right, first pass here. Looks like I'm definitely going to need to trim out those parts that I just tacked in there. Not a problem at all. I need to push the steering rack as far backward as possible so that when the car is on the ground, not only is the tie rod level with the rack, but also side to side, that the play is not too far forward or rear. So as a result, I need to push the steering rack further back, and there is going to be contact between the cylinder 1 through 3 exhaust header right there, the downpipe, and the subframe that I was really looking to install just in this little groove here. This little groove is pretty big here. It's good enough for like a 2-inch pipe, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to actually push this back a little bit more. As you can see, I need to trim that guy as well. I want to trim these right now. I want to resize the steering rack and see where things lie. Just remember, guys, this rack is the original E30 rack. The M3 rack is a little different. The E36 M3 rack is a little different in that the outlets are in a different location. The angle here is at a different location. The mounts on it are slightly different, but I'm using this for sizing purposes only. So I just want to see what kind of a ballpark I'm looking at when I install the E36 M3 rack. So let's make those modifications and let's give it another quick test run. New steering rack came in from the Rack Doctor. This is a 1995 BMW M3 E36 rack with a 3.2 turns lock-to-lock ratio. This has been completely refabbed and ready to install. Obviously, it's going to require a custom installation, and it's going to replace this guy. There are some things to note, and we'll go over that throughout the video, and of course, the power steering lines install video coming up over the next couple months. Actually, maybe a month. All right, so it's basically installed. The 95 M3 rack is now installed. It's been pretty much evened out from left to right, so I kind of know where the center of the center position is, and I can measure from left to right where the steering rack center needs to be. As you can see up here, it looks really, oh, I just kicked it, damn it. You can see that it's actually really nicely positioned. Going down below, there's no interferences whatsoever here with the oil pan, with the arm, and the steering column. Yes, it does need to be lengthened, and I am going to work on a solution to lengthen that column, but that is so easy. It's not, I could do that with my eyes closed. If you look over here, you'll see that when the wheel is positioned straight, that the line of the tie rod matches pretty closely with the hole for the on the spindle. So that means that it is going to be perfectly in line, we have it pushed up as much as possible to prevent any type of bump steer. The lines are actually coming out right in a very accessible location, as opposed to the other steering rack, which had the lines coming out on the other side toward the oil pan. Not ideal. But here we are in a really good spot. We'll use some E36 outer tie rods, brand new. We got a new strut coming. We got new sway bar mount location. I think we're gonna get this thing in good shape. So now that we have that, let's talk a little bit about the subframe installation. Okay, the 95 M3 steering rack is now installed. You can see that the subframe is going to be a 1.75 inch round tube. It's going to be a 2-part subframe. The first part is going to mount from this bracket here that I made, and it's going to go straight across. It's going to come in at an angle, but it's going to come straight across just like this. See? But it's going to hit the downpipe, and that's not good. We don't want it to hit the downpipe, so we need to make another end that's going to end up going along that other bracket on the other side of the subframe, and it's going to curve around that downpipe, and it's going to meet. So there will be a weld location in between that connects both halves of those subframes, and then we will end up gusseting it together. Then when we remove the complete drivetrain, we can completely weld the subframe up and gusset it as necessary. So what I decided to do was take the 1.75 inch tube, 1/8 inch wall thickness that I kind of already welded half of it onto the actual subframe. I need to make a loop to go underneath the exhaust manifold, making sure not to hit the steering rack along the way. And what I decided to do is use this handy dandy, not so very good tubing bender from Harbor Freight. It's not the best. I'm not very happy about it. I think that Eastwood makes a much better pneumatically controlled tube bender, but it's, you know, 500 bucks. This is only 120 bucks. So this thing bends the metal the way I want it to. If you don't bend it too much, it won't kink too much. So that's really the idea. So I want to bend this guy. I want to cut it. And I want to start to see if I can form it around that exhaust downpipe and see if I can match it up to the other side of the subframe and see how that goes. Couple more cuts and we're getting pretty close. As you can see, the droop of underneath the cylinder 1, 2, 3 exhaust manifold is kind of getting into its place. I do need to trim a little bit more off here, and hopefully this thing can kind of slide right on up. Maybe make it a little bit of a twist to make it work. But this is actually really close, and we'll smooth all this out. We'll make it look like it's one big pipe. We'll make sure that we get really good penetrating welds in those 1/8 inch thickness there. And I think we're gonna be in good shape. All right, so I put the steering rack back in, and I wanted to give it another test fit. You can see right there, I need to basically come up like this, you know, but there's a mismatch between the two diameters there. It's kind of like an offset there, and I just need to make sure that I clear the steering rack because that's where the lower mount, that's where the mount is actually going to go. So I just need to make sure that everything is in place. So what I need to do is remove the rack from the equation. I need to tack in this guy, and then I need to make gussets at its interface between the two tubes, which is going to be right there. So it's going to look a little bit ugly for a while, but it will look better after it's gusseted and cleaned. All right, let's take a look at the damage. So as you can see here, I did lay a couple of nice beads down there. As you can see that I did need to break it up into 3 different pieces. Not a problem. We can figure that out and get it to work. This will be polished, cleaned, painted, and gusseted and welded up. But right now, it's in a really good place. I don't see any other interferences. The steering rack is going to fit perfectly, exactly where we want. Next, let's do steering rack installation with the 2 mounts. Okay, this rack is exactly where I want it to be positioned. There is a subframe, and there is the rack. As you can see, I'm going to need to weld something along the subframe that connects to the rack underneath on that side. And on the other side, you see a very similar situation, except I need to deal with the challenge of the context point right here, where actually it's the vertex point, where the 2 tubes collaborate. And I need to weld something from here up to that. And that's going to be a through hole on the lower and the top. The upper piece right there is going to be a weld nut. Now let's talk about the hardware and the location of the weld nut. This here is 3/16 inch thick steel. This is the nuts that I'm talking about. They are flange nuts. This is a 7/16 inch bit, and it will get drilled right through this metal. And then the weld nut will go right on that. And the bracket that will be used will be custom made, and it'll basically be whatever shape I want in order to conform to the subframe. Remember that the weld nuts go on the top of the steering rack. The through holes go on the bottom. The reason is because it's a lot easier to drop a bolt down than it is to put it in from above. There's a lot more interference. Pretty obvious, don't need to explain any further there. But that is the plan here, and I'm gonna draw this up in cardboard. Then I'm gonna start drilling out the holes. I'm gonna start fitting it, tacking it with the steering rack in place, making sure that I'm taking note of all of my measurements to make sure that the steering rack is square, that it's centered, and that it is at the right height. Those three axes are very, very important. I'll say that one more time. Its forward and backward is square. Its height is good and as close to the oil pan as possible. And finally, its side to side is good, or else your lock is going to be more on one side than the other. Your wheel's going to turn more to the left or more to the right, and that's not good either. Okay, both of these lower mounts. This is the passenger side, and this is the driver's side. Now that I got the lower through hole parts of the mounts understood, the steering rack is essentially placed in this location. Now it's a matter of welding the brackets on the upper side along with your weld nuts, so that when you do screw it onto the specific length bolts, it'll just bolt right in, and it'll clamp it down, and you'll be in good shape. Now I'm using 1/4 inch steel for this, which is a lot thicker than the steel that they used on the original E30 subframe, which has been known to fail, crack. That's why a lot of these companies sell updated enhancement bracketry that you can weld on to strengthen the subframe, especially when you do an engine swap. So this subframe is actually going to be probably stronger than the original subframe. It's going to definitely handle the torque of this N54. Now, in order to effectively save some time, what I decided to do was to build spacers that basically replicate the thickness of the mounting location on the actual E36 steering rack, such that I don't need the rack installed in order to put the upper perch installation with the weld nut on there. So this is gonna make things a little bit easier. I can at least have the through bolt go there, and then I could basically replicate the top without having the whole steering rack getting in the way and getting weld splatter on it and everything like that. Got them both mocked up. Now it's just a matter of cutting, drilling, welding, and welding. Fitting it onto this 1/4 inch piece of carbon steel. Both of these guys look like it will very nicely fit, just like that. Minimize the amount of cuts you gotta make, guys. That's how it works. Now, I installed the spacers with the custom size shortened bolts with the nuts. The nuts and the brackets are up here. Everything is loose. The nuts are not welded to the brackets because I wanted to make sure that when I tighten all this down, that I actually have good fillet weld opportunities on the upper side. Then I'm going to take the assembly off, weld up the nuts in the location they need to be in, and then do the same thing with the weld nuts, and then just tack it all in. It should be pretty easy. fits really well. Really well. So I've got my handy dandy little welding table here hooked up to ground, and I got my 2 brackets. I gotta clamp them down with this mini C-clamp. Make sure that it's right in the middle where it needs to be. And then just weld. Same thing on the other side. Right in the middle. Clamp it down and weld. Clamp. Perfect. Perfect. And before anybody asks, the locking mechanism on these 2 nuts are from a crimp style, where they crimp just the top of the nut in order to get the locking mechanism. When you screw it on just at the very tip, it actually keeps on locking as you go all the way through. There's no nylon or anything like that in here. I would not have welded a nylon lock nut because the heat would have melted the nylon and plastic and it would have evaporated and become useless. So yes, these are crimp style, which involves no plastic or nylon. Alright guys, now that we're done with the subframe and the steering rack installation, let's focus on the next aspect of this swap. Pretty clear, cut and dry, and that is the shifter shortening. Now I did this on the E36 M3, the N54 swap on that. I've done it on this E31 S85. I did it on the E30 S62. I've done it on every single swap that I've done, and you need to, because when you're putting a larger drivetrain into something that was designed for something smaller, you need to shorten the shift linkage because the transmission is bigger, it pushes further back. So now we need to shorten the shift linkage, and I want to show you how on this E30 N54. Here are the shifter parts.